Philip sprawls amid the wreckage of a London hotel room. The camera snap-zooms on a champagne-soaked letter marked Philly, its edges sputtering like a fuse. A cello fingerboard slices across the frame, Kelly's bow screeching while the borders of an old Polaroid curl into charcoal. The guide's face glitches between grainy emulsion and razor-sharp pixels, a digital saint stitched from memory shards. Love and guilt, tech and humanity rip each other apart in strobing light. That's Black Mirror S75 Eulogy in a pulse. Here's the pulse without spilling the guts. Years after a messy breakup, reclusive photographer Philip is asked by a startup called Eulogy to donate his memories for a high-tech memorial to Carol, the woman he never stopped regretting. Their gear lets you literally walk inside old photos. Philip figures he'll hand over a few clips, sign a waiver, and go back to hiding. Instead, every vandalized snapshot yanks him into the past he tried to erase because the most brutal edits weren't on the photographs. They were in the story he's been telling himself for decades. The episode poses a knife-edge question. If we can retouch our memories the way we retouch selfies, can grief stay honest? That tension is the lens we'll use tonight. First, how those analog prints, coffee stains, pen marks, torn corners, become smoking gun evidence of selective amnesia. Second, why the guide's odd emotional lag cracks open the ethical black hole of digital doppelgangers. Third, how one unread proposal and one unopened letter turn a private heartbreak into a universal horror about communication failure in the swipe-to-delete age. One more lure before we dive deeper. Series creator Charlie Brooker once teased an early draft so dark Netflix told him to bury it, something beyond burning the pictures. Did Philip nuke his own memories? Did the AI offer him a painless digital death? The files are sealed for now, but every frame of the final cut leaves breadcrumbs. Stick around while we chase them down, one clue at a time. In interviews, Charlie Brooker described Eulogy as the episode that hurt the most to write, not because it was the darkest, but because it was, in his words, the closest to reality. Unlike the dystopias he's known for, this one doesn't deal with rogue algorithms or collapsing democracies. It deals with something far more fragile. The stories we tell ourselves to avoid grief, and the digital tools that might one day force us to remember what we'd rather forget. The seed for Eulogy came from two places. First, from Peter Jackson's The Beatles' Get Back documentary, which used machine learning to clean decades-old film and audio. Brooker found the idea haunting. It's not that you remember the moment, he said. It's that the machine helps you relive it, clearer than ever. Second, from a more personal place, Brooker's mother passed away during the early scripting of Season 7. In Eulogy, you can feel the weight of someone asking not what a person was, but whether we ever saw them clearly to begin with. The script was co-written with Ella Road, a playwright and screenwriter known for The Phlebotomist, a stage drama about genetic profiling. Road brought in the emotional intelligence, Brooker brought in the tech paranoia. Together, they built a world where grief becomes a corporate service, complete with NDAs, user agreements, and memory licensing. Visually, the episode needed to split itself across two realities, the gritty present and the reconstructed photographs. Directors Chris Barrett and Luke Taylor, who previously worked on experimental VR short films, were brought in specifically for their ability to handle long takes and immersive transitions. Every scene that takes place inside a photo was crafted using a mix of actual film prints, AI-driven depth mapping, and motion capture to allow Paul Giamatti's performance to interact with frozen backgrounds. That's why the photographic world doesn't feel glossy. It feels uncanny, as if you're watching real memories play out on a stage that refuses to move. Behind the scenes, the biggest creative fight was over the tone. Netflix initially pushed for a colder, twistier third act, something with a reveal about the guide being malicious, or the memories being synthetic. But Brooker and Road insisted, this isn't a horror story in the traditional sense. It's a tragedy. And tragedies, they argued, aren't about deception. They're about discovery too late. In the original ending, Philip was meant to burn all the undeveloped photos after discovering the letter, effectively choosing peace through forgetting. That was replaced with the more ambiguous funeral scene, which left the door open for emotional healing, something Black Mirror doesn't often do. And then there's the music. Carol's cello composition, which her daughter Kelly plays at the end, wasn't in the script. It was added in post after composer Amelia Warner, yes, that Amelia Warner, watched a rough cut and sent Brooker an unsolicited demo called Unsent Letter. They wrote it into the final scene overnight, making it the only Black Mirror episode to end not with dread, but with music that's somehow forgiving. From the first frame, Eulogy, wears its aesthetic like emotional armor. Everything is visual code. Let's start with the most deceptively simple, photographs. At first, they appear as nostalgic props, sepia-toned, slightly warped, the kind you'd find in a shoebox under the bed. But as the episode unfolds, these photos stop being artifacts. They become battlegrounds. Each scratch, each ink blot, each ripped edge isn't just damage. It's an editorial decision. The story of Philip and Carol is told less through dialogue than through Mark's maiden absence, what we no longer allow ourselves to see. Take the scene where Philip walks into the photo from their final weekend together. The moment he steps in, the saturation shifts, colors flatten, shadows deepen, movement slows by a fraction. It's subtle, but disorienting. Cinematographer Sophie Mondi intentionally degraded the frame rate to mimic the texture of degraded analog film, while still rendering it in 4K. The result, a place that feels real, but never quite breathes. Like a memory pretending to be truth. One of the most chilling uses of cinematography comes during a memory collapse sequence. As Philip approaches Carol's face in a photo he once scratched out, the image begins to glitch, not with digital artifacts, but with photochemical distortions, exposure flares, developer streaks, ghosting trails. It's a deliberate inversion of sci-fi glitch tropes. We're not watching tech fail, we're watching emotion rupture the very medium. Then there's the guide. Played with eerie restraint by Patsy Ferran, she's not quite AI, not quite human. Her speech is slightly delayed. Her eyes never quite meet Philip's. In one key scene, she hesitates before responding, then says, "I'm trying to emulate compassion." It's not played for horror. It's played for heartbreak. She is quite literally the daughter of Carol, but made of code and curated data. She exists only because Philip never showed up. In that sense, she's not a ghost. She's an afterthought with agency. The fact that she glitches, not when recalling trauma, but when witnessing affection, isn't a technical bug. It's a philosophical one. The guide wasn't built to feel warmth. She was built to organize memories into legible chunks. So when confronted with unrecoverable tenderness, Carol's laugh, her smell, her handwriting, she stutters, fails. And in that failure, we glimpse a terrifying possibility, that grief may be too analog for even our best digital tools to hold. Let's talk about one of the most deceptively powerful characters in the episode, the cello. On paper, it's just an instrument, but visually, it's treated like a relic. Every time it appears, the camera slows. The lighting warms. In the funeral sequence, Kelly doesn't just play it, she unlocks it. Her bow draws out the melody Carol once composed but never recorded. And this is key. The piece isn't nostalgic. It's unfinished. The composer is dead. The song is alive. That reversal embodies the episode's thesis: the dead don't need clarity. The living do. Symbolically, the cello becomes what the photographs tried and failed to be, a vessel for continuity. Where images were frozen, the music moves. Where the snapshots were staged, the performance is felt. It is quite literally the only moment in the episode where something is created in real time rather than recalled. Is the act of grief becoming art? But perhaps the most tragic visual motif is something most viewers miss. Carol's face is never fully clear until Philip stops looking for her in photographs. It's only when he finds the physical letter, creases, handwriting, real ink, that her image reconstructs in his mind without technological mediation. That moment plays out in silence. No music. No glitches. Just him sitting on the floor crying. For once, there's no system to help him experience the memory. And that is the point. The most honest moments of mourning, Eulogy argues, cannot be outsourced to any interface, no matter how beautiful the UI. In short, what appears to be a gentle sci-fi love story is really a visual autopsy of how we curate our own pasts. Every frame is asking, when you remember someone, are you seeing them, or your own edit of them? Eulogy unfolds less like a traditional narrative and more like a psychological excavation. Its structure doesn't follow the typical Black Mirror formula of rise-collapse-revelation. Instead, it mimics the mechanics of memory itself, recursive, nonlinear, and susceptible to corruption. That's why the story doesn't begin at the moment of Carol's death, or even Philip's grief. It begins at avoidance, his reluctance to remember. Every subsequent scene isn't an escalation of events, but a delayering of denial. Let's break this down. Rather than flashbacks, the episode uses what might be called immersive reentry. Each photo functions as a psychological trapdoor. Philip steps into an image, not just recalling, but physically inhabiting moments from decades prior. But crucially, these aren't clean reenactments. The past doesn't play out as it actually happened, but as it was recorded, with bias, with loss, with damage. This is a radical departure from conventional memory sequences in film, where flashbacks are often treated as gospel. Here, they're unreliable interfaces, curated as much by absence as presence. To enforce this idea, the directors employ a brilliant visual misdirect. Initially, the transitions into photo spaces are smooth, slow, dreamlike. But midway through, as Philip begins to resist the process, the transitions become jagged. He re-enters a photo only to be thrown into a different version of the moment. A laugh becomes a frown. A hug becomes hesitation. It's not time travel, it's truth shifting. Each re-entry reflects a deeper, less edited version of his past, suggesting that the interface doesn't reveal the full picture until the user is emotionally ready to receive it. This mirrors real trauma recovery. You don't get the full truth in one sitting. You revisit. You revise. You misremember. Then one day, the emotional cost of distortion outweighs the fear of clarity, and that's when the real memory surfaces. Narratively, Eulogy echoes Brooker's earlier episode, The Entire History of You, S1E3, which also interrogated how memory can be weaponized through tech. But there's a key difference. In history, memory is mined for truth as control. A man proves betrayal by replaying exact footage. In Eulogy, memory is navigated for truth as compassion. A man must forgive the parts of his story that didn't unfold the way he wanted. That subtle shift from surveillance to surrender is what makes Eulogy arguably the more emotionally mature of the two. Let's now touch on pacing, often the dividing line for viewers and critics. Some critics hail the episode as emotionally exacting and poetically slow. Others dismissed it as lethargic or too interior. The tension lies in expectation. Fans of Black Mirror often arrive seeking a twist, a gut punch, a grotesque future. Eulogy denies all three. Its climax is not a reveal but a release. There is no grand deception, only a man realizing he was the unreliable narrator of his own grief. That kind of narrative payoff is rare in science fiction and almost unheard of in digital-era anthologies. But it's also why the episode hit a nerve. Indeed, this structural choice led to debates in the critic community. A viral Medium essay titled Why Eulogy Fails as Black Mirror argued that the episode betrays the show's tech critique mandate by becoming a therapy session. In response, The Guardian published, Eulogy is the tech critique we need now, contending that the scariest part isn't the tech, it's the fact that we want it to do the grieving for us. That duality is what makes the episode fertile ground for disagreement. It refuses to be one thing. It's not tech dystopia. It's emotional archaeology with tech tools. One more structural insight, the letter. From a screenwriting standpoint, the unopened letter is a classical device, Chekhov's gun, unsent. But Eulogy breaks convention in how it delivers it. Philip first sees the letter inside a photo, unreachable. Later, he finds the physical version in real life. What makes this significant is the reverse sequencing. In most stories, the protagonist finds a letter, then flashes back. Here, the flashback comes first, but the meaning is withheld until the real-world object confirms it. This reversal forces the viewer to accept that virtual closure isn't real closure. You can revisit the past all you want, but until you face it in the here and now, nothing changes. It's also worth noting that the letter isn't shown being read aloud. We don't get a montage of Philip reacting in real time. Instead, we cut to him sitting silently on the floor. The show trusts us to know what's in the letter. That narrative restraint is rare. It's as if the show itself is practicing what it preaches, letting the unsaid be felt. In summary, Eulogy doesn't follow a linear arc. It spirals inward. Each scene doesn't move the story forward so much as pull the character deeper into himself, until the truth isn't revealed, it's accepted. That's not just storytelling. That's therapy, disguised as science fiction. Eulogy might be the most personal story Black Mirror has ever told, but beneath that intimacy lies a deeply systemic commentary. This is not just a story about one man mourning one woman. It is a microcosm of a broader cultural dysfunction, our fear of unedited memory, and our increasing dependence on digital proxies to do the hardest human work, grieving, forgiving, remembering. The episode never says this directly. It doesn't have to. It shows it. Let's begin with the root question the episode never names but constantly circles. When did we start outsourcing our emotional labor to machines? The fictional startup Eulogy offers a service we all recognize, the corporate smoothing of messy human experiences. Its branding is pristine. Its employees are polite. Its terms and conditions are longer than the memorial itself. The goal isn't truth. The goal is comfort through curation. You don't remember your loved one. You remember the version of them that the platform can render from available data, photos, voice samples, digital footprints. This reflects a very real trend. Funeral homes now offer AI-generated eulogies. Instagram memories resurface annually with algorithmic cheer. People are reviving dead relatives with ChatGPT-style prompts and voice clones. The technology isn't speculative. It's here. And Eulogy captures what happens when we no longer control the border between emotional closure and emotional outsourcing. The tension at the heart of the story, the core engine of conflict, is not between Philip and Carol or Philip and Kelly. It's between Philip and his own ability to bear witness. From the first scene, he avoids the memorial. Then he avoids the photos. Then he avoids the guide's questions. But the more he retreats, the more the system confronts him. This inversion of agency, where the tech isn't an antagonist but a mirror, marks a major departure from Black Mirror's typical template. The villain isn't the machine. It's the man who used it to hide from himself. There's a crucial dialogue exchange that crystallizes this. When the guide says, "You've uploaded 184 images. Only 7 include Carol's full face," Philip defensively replies, "That's all I had." She pauses, then replies, "You had more. You marked her out." It's subtle, but it rewrites the entire power dynamic. The machine didn't erase Carol. Philip did. The system only reveals the erasure and asks silently, why? Now let's widen the lens. Philip is not just a grieving ex-lover. He is also a gatekeeper of narrative. As a former war photographer, he has spent decades deciding what stories get told and which images get framed. His personal archive becomes a metaphor for national or generational memory. What we choose to remember, what we crop, burn, blur, isn't just about forgetting. It's about control. In that sense, Eulogy becomes a parable about collective history, how entire eras can vanish because the curators couldn't bear to face their own complicity. This makes the episode particularly resonant in an era of revisionist memory. Statues fall. Curriculum shifts. Digital archives delete with a click. Eulogy dares to ask what happens after the deletion, not just to society but to the self. Let's look now at Kelly, not as Carol's daughter, but as a meta-entity. She is the product of Philip's absence. Had he shown up? Had he read the letter? Had he looked at a different version of his past? But he didn't. So she becomes a kind of ghost made of possibility. Her presence in the episode is what philosopher Jacques Derrida might call hauntological return, not of the dead, but of the future that never happened. Her very existence reminds Philip, and us, of what was almost real. And then there's Carol herself. She is largely silent, mostly seen through others' lenses. But what makes her powerful is that her voice survives not through the platform, but through analog traces, the letter, the music, the photographs before they were scanned. She becomes a symbol of a memory that resists digitization. She is grief in its rawest form, uncompressed, unindexed, unrecoverable once lost. What makes this episode truly devastating is that it doesn't resolve its conflicts. It holds them in suspension. Philip gets no clean catharsis. Kelly gets no father. Carol gets no reply. The cello piece is played, but the audience, both in the show and in real life, can't quite tell if it's beautiful or broken. That's intentional. Eulogy doesn't give us a moral to walk away with. It gives us a mirror and dares us not to look away. One final detail. In the final overhead shot, as Philip walks alone from the funeral hall, the camera lingers on a tree-lined path that mirrors the layout of a photo album. The grass between the walkways looks like negative film. The benches resemble developed frames. It's not flashy, but it quietly suggests that even his future walk will be shaped by the memories he's finally chosen to leave undelete. In the end, Eulogy is not about death. It's about what we kill to avoid remembering, and whether we're brave enough to resurrect it. Eulogy doesn't just dissect individual grief, it exposes how modern societies systematically reshape mourning into a transaction. When grief is outsourced, when memory is commodified, when pain becomes a UX problem to be streamlined, we're not just changing how we remember the dead. We're changing how we live with the truth. Let's start with impact. The episode resonated deeply with 2 distinct audiences, those who have experienced regret-laced grief, a death with things left unsaid, a message never delivered, and those uneasy about the growing trend of algorithmic memorialization. Reddit threads were flooded with real-life users recounting moments when Facebook showed them, on this day, photos they'd long tried to forget. One user wrote, "The AI kept giving me the same image of my dad every year, but we hadn't spoken in the 6 years before he died." That's not nostalgia. That's a forced reckoning. So who does this system serve? In Eulogy, the startup never speaks in its own voice. It's a ghost corporation, always mediated through smiling reps, polite pop-ups, and default consent forms. That's not laziness. It's design. The system is built to have no one to blame. When Philip asks, "Who's watching these memories?" the guide responds, "They're not for observation. They're for arrangement." It's chilling in its corporate indifference. But we've seen this before, in the real world. Terms of service agreements are longer than novels. Deepfake voices are sold to grieving families as emotional continuity tools. Even apps like Be Real or Apple Memories now choose which moments matter enough to resurface. When does curation become coercion? When does help become surveillance in disguise? Let's talk accountability. Philip wants to blame the system. But every moment reminds us the damage began long before the technology. He was the one who scratched Carol's face out of the photos. He was the one who avoided her messages. The system just surfaced what he buried. In that sense, Eulogy shifts the blame line. It doesn't condemn tech. It condemns how easily we let it become a scapegoat for our own emotional cowardice. But that's not to say the tech is blameless. The episode highlights how systems built without moral guardrails don't just fail, they anesthetize. When the guide shows Philip curated best moments, they're edited to perfection. Perfect smiles, clean light, no pauses. It's emotional propaganda. A greatest hits album with no liner notes. And that's where the real horror emerges, not in the glitch, but in the polish. The more seamless the memory, the less space it leaves for truth. This brings us to the central moral threshold. What are we willing to erase in the name of closure? Carol's cello piece is unfinished. Her letter is unread until too late. Her daughter is real but born of absence. And yet, the system wants to summarize all this into a clean digital shrine. Philip's refusal, his insistence on seeing the messy, human, unscripted truth, becomes a quiet rebellion. It's the only moral stand the episode offers. And it's not loud. It's not triumphant. It's simply him choosing to remember without editing. In that moment, Eulogy flips the ethical script on Black Mirror's legacy. It says, the danger isn't that machines will control our emotions. It's that we'll let them, because the truth hurts more than the fiction. That's why the episode's final act doesn't offer justice or clarity. Kelly doesn't find peace. Philip doesn't get redemption. Carol doesn't get closure. What we get instead is a cello note held just a beat too long, ambiguous, wavering, human. It's in that note that Eulogy makes its most radical claim. Ethics is not about resolution. It's about endurance. Not every grief will be solvable. Not every memory will be recoverable. Not every wrong can be made right. But we owe it to the dead and to ourselves not to flatten that complexity for the sake of digital convenience. That's what the system in Eulogy gets wrong. And that's what the episode itself, in all its restraint and refusal to deliver easy answers, gets so profoundly right. Eulogy doesn't just reflect a speculative future, it eerily documents a present we're already living in, frame by frame, decision by decision. For a show famed for its techno-paranoia, this episode makes its most terrifying move by dialing down the sci-fi. The tech in this story doesn't feel far-fetched because, in essence, it already exists. Let's start with the core technology, interactive memory reconstruction. While walking into a photo may still sound like science fiction, companies like Microsoft, Meta, and Google are already investing heavily in AI-driven memory environments. Google Photos now uses AI to generate animated memory reels. Meta's VR arm has demonstrated early prototypes where users can step into 3D capture moments using volumetric video. And in 2023, a startup called Storyfile made headlines by allowing mourners to interact with holograms of the deceased, scripted from pre-death interviews and machine learning approximations. In that light, Eulogy is not a cautionary tale. It's a live feed from the near future. The implications are profound. If grief becomes something we can program, if closure is something we can license, subscribe to, gamify, what happens to authenticity? Do we grieve better with help from technology, or do we simply grieve more efficiently? That's not a rhetorical question. In 2022, a paper published in the journal Death Studies examined the psychological impact of algorithmic memory resurfacing. The conclusion: while some users found comfort in AI-curated memorials, others reported increased emotional dissonance, unresolved trauma, and even PTSD relapse. The researchers called it grief interruption syndrome. Eulogy plays directly into this. Philip's healing only begins when he stops using the system. Not when he masters it. Not when it gives him answers. But when he finally exits it and touches something real, a physical letter, a voice unfiltered by code, a daughter not crafted by interface. That's the unspoken thesis. Human emotion is analog, and no matter how precise the algorithm, some wounds will never be scriptable. Let's move to the corporate dimension. In the real world, our digital afterlives are already managed by platforms. Facebook has memorial accounts. Google allows users to assign data trustees. Startups like Replica, Hereafter AI, and Eternime offer services to preserve your voice for future generations. Their marketing is clean, soft-lit, compassionate. But the fine print, it's a minefield. User agreements often allow companies to retain, repurpose, and even train AI on your uploaded memories after death. Eulogy exposes this through omission. The corporation in the episode never explains its motives. There's no CEO speech, no ethics committee, no villain monologue. And that's the point. In the real world, the most dangerous decisions are rarely made maliciously, they're made silently. So how do we respond? Let's break down 3 actionable questions Eulogy asks its audience to wrestle with, not as viewers, but as citizens of the digital present. 1. Who owns your memories? In the show, Philip hands over images of Carol, thinking he's just donating files. What he's really doing is relinquishing control over her narrative. In real life, that happens every time we upload a photo to a platform without reading the terms. That smiling vacation selfie? It might be used to train facial recognition. That voicemail to your kid? It could become part of a synthetic voice database. The solution isn't to unplug. It's to legislate. Some countries are beginning to draft digital afterlife laws, giving families the right to delete or manage data posthumously. But most of the world hasn't caught up. If data is the new estate, we need a new kind of will, a memory will, a set of instructions for how we want to be remembered, and by whom. 2. What happens when empathy is outsourced? The guide in Eulogy is not evil. She's helpful, polite, responsive, but she's not human. When she hesitates before expressing sympathy, it feels wrong. Not because it's insincere, but because it reminds us that empathy requires experience, not simulation. In today's world, AI chatbots now handle grief counseling, mental health triage, and even suicide prevention, e.g. Wobot, WISA. Some of these tools work, but they raise urgent questions. What happens when empathy is automated? When pain is answered by predictive text? When a bot tells you it's okay to cry, but has never known what crying feels like? Eulogy doesn't argue that these tools shouldn't exist, but it forces us to interrogate their limits. If we allow empathy to become something we consume, will we forget how to offer it ourselves? 3. Is forgetting a human right? One of the most powerful revelations in the episode is that Philip chose to forget. He didn't want to carry Carol's face. He wanted to move on. And yet the system brought her back, scrubbed, organized, recompiled. That tension speaks to a new debate in data ethics, the right to be forgotten. Originally enshrined in the EU's GDPR, it gives individuals the ability to request the erasure of their digital footprint. But it's not absolute. Platforms can deny the request if they deem the information in the public interest. So here's the question Eulogy leaves us with: what happens when our pain becomes profitable? Will the system ever let us forget? There's a haunting moment in the episode where the guide says our memories improve when viewed together. It sounds beautiful, almost healing, but it's a lie. Memories don't improve when processed. They clarify when felt, and sometimes they scar. That, too, is part of mourning. Which brings us to the final point. Resistance is not technological, it's emotional. The most revolutionary act in Eulogy isn't turning off a machine. It's choosing to sit alone with grief, without filters, without edits, without playback. Just one man holding a letter that should have changed everything and saying, "I missed it, and now I live with it." In that moment, the show stops being science fiction. It becomes a mirror. Eulogy didn't just strike a chord, it echoed. Across online forums, academic panels, and even grief counseling communities, this episode spurred not just discussion, but reinterpretation, remixing, and resistance. It became more than a story. It became a litmus test for how viewers see the role of memory, control, and legacy in a digital world. Let's begin with the ripple effect. Within a week of its premiere, the episode inspired thousands of memes, essays, fan theories, and TikToks. But unlike other Black Mirror episodes that often produce ironic or meme-based virality, play stupid games, win stupid tech dystopias, Eulogy triggered a quiet kind of cultural shock. People weren't laughing. They were remembering. One Reddit thread titled, "The Photo I Can't Burn," became a digital confessional. Users shared personal stories of regretful photos, unsent letters, and last messages left unread. A woman wrote about deleting every photo of her father, then desperately trying to recover them 5 years later. Another recounted how her grandmother's voicemail was the only file she still had, and feared one day an AI would mimic that voice and overwrite the memory entirely. Academics took notice. Within a month, 2 university departments, digital ethics at Oxford and memory studies at NYU, used Eulogy as a teaching case. One class discussion reportedly centered around the question, if grief becomes replicable, does love become conditional? And in an unexpected turn, several grief tech startups issued public blog posts responding to the episode, some in defense of their work, others acknowledging the ethical tension. Hereafter, AI's CEO tweeted, "Eulogy was hard to watch, and that's why we have to keep watching it." It's rare for fiction to provoke a real-time, ethical audit from the very industry it critiques. Let's now turn to extended media, works that either predicted, mirror, or expand on the themes of Eulogy. If the episode left you hollow, questioning, or strangely motivated to reframe your own digital traces, here are a few hand-picked recommendations. Recommended films. 1. Afterlife, 1998, Dir Hirokazu Korida. What if you could take only one memory into the afterlife? That's the premise of this gentle Japanese masterpiece, where the newly deceased must select a single moment to be recreated on film before they move on. Like Eulogy, it interrogates the tension between memory as emotion and memory as artifact. And like Eulogy, it understands that the act of choosing is often more painful than the act of remembering. 2. Marjorie Prime, 2017, Dir Michael Almerida. Adapted from the Pulitzer-nominated play, this haunting sci-fi drama features holograms of deceased loved ones being used to comfort the aging and dying. The film explores memory degradation, revision, and whether comfort justifies distortion. Think of it as Eulogy's quieter, more claustrophobic cousin. 3. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 2004, Dir Michel Gondry. A visual and emotional kaleidoscope about erasing painful memories. But unlike Eulogy, which confronts erasure through technological inevitability, Eternal Sunshine questions whether forgetting is a gift or a curse, and whether love can survive the cleansing of its own scars. 4. The Final Cut, 2004, Dir Omar Naim. A lesser-known Robin Williams thriller set in a world where people's lives are recorded and edited into memorial reels after death. Sound familiar? The ethical questions it raises, who gets to edit what gets cut and why, are uncannily aligned with Eulogy's core tensions. Recommended books. 1. The Work of Mourning by Jacques Derrida. Not an easy read, but essential if you want to understand the philosophical roots of hauntology, the presence of absence, the echo of lost futures. Derrida's essays provide a framework for viewing Kelly, Carol's daughter, not just as a character, but as a theoretical ghost, a product of what Philip never chose. 2. Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Umoja Noble. This nonfiction work interrogates how algorithmic systems reproduce and reinforce cultural bias. While not about memory directly, it provides a critical lens for understanding why systems like Eulogy might perpetuate clean, palatable grief over messy, true mourning. 3. The Future of Nostalgia by Svetlana Boym. Boym distinguishes between restorative nostalgia, a desire to rebuild the past, and reflective nostalgia, a meditation on its passing. Eulogy thrives in that reflective zone, and Boym's writing gives language to its emotional gravity. 4. The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. A brilliant sci-fi novel about a man whose dreams alter reality, and a psychologist who tries to harness that power. While not explicitly about memory, the novel explores the ethics of reimagining the past and what is lost when we overwrite the imperfect world in pursuit of a perfect one. These works aren't just thematically aligned. They're formally aligned. Each of them, like Eulogy, resists easy answers. They don't try to fix grief. They try to contain it, hold it just long enough for it to burn cleanly, rather than get digitally diffused into numbness. They remind us that stories about memory are never really about the past. They're about power, about who gets to tell the story, about what truths we tolerate, and about what ghosts we choose to keep. Eulogy ends with a song unfinished. These companion pieces, they keep playing the melody in different keys. If you felt something in the silence that followed the episode's final frame, anger, ache, awe, these films and books won't offer comfort, but they'll offer continuation. Just because you can remember it, the guide says almost gently, doesn't mean you understood it. It's a quiet line, easily missed. But taken seriously, it rewrites the whole episode. Because in Eulogy, the tragedy isn't that Philip forgot, it's that he misunderstood. He misread Carol, misread her silence, misread his own cowardice as closure, misread the absence of memory as the end of grief. Now we know better. That's what Eulogy leaves us with, not resolution, but a kind of haunted clarity. The cello song still plays, unfinished. The letter is read too late. Kelly, a daughter born of a forked timeline, plays witness not to justice, but to a man trying, finally, to face the version of himself that didn't show up. So let's ask the real question. What if the ending had changed? What if Philip had read the letter back then? What if he'd gotten on the train, found Carol before the baby was born, apologized like he meant it, stayed? Would Eulogy still be Black Mirror, or would it become something else entirely? A parable, maybe? A redemption arc? But here's the catch. That story would still need to reckon with memory. Because whether he stayed or left, he'd still be editing the past from the future. That's the unresolvable loop the episode dares to enter. Not how tech distorts memory, but how we do. And maybe have always done. There are no villains in Eulogy. No mad inventors, no killer apps, no social scores or eye implants. Just a man, a system, and the residue of love. The horror is soft. The violence is psychic. And the only thing more unbearable than remembering is remembering wrong. And so Eulogy does something rare, not just for Black Mirror, but for speculative fiction in general. It argues that our most dangerous future isn't algorithmic. It's emotional. Not because we'll have too much memory, but because we'll have no honest way to carry it. Maybe that's why this episode hits so many of us harder than we expected. It didn't show us a dystopia. It showed us a familiar living room, a creased photo, a voicemail we can't delete, a letter we never opened. It showed us the thing we thought we had time to forget. Surprisingly, yes, but so quiet it went unnoticed by many. The photo Philip enters mid-episode, where Carol wears a San Junipero tank top and holds a disposable camera, is a direct visual callback to Black Mirror S3E4. Also, behind the piano in the memorial space, a pause screen briefly displays memory frame index, 15 million, a wink to 15 million merits. No major plot connection. Just subtle intertextual ghosts. What if you could walk into your most painful memory, not as a spectator, but as a participant, would you? And if the answer is no, what does that say about who you are now? In one emoji, describe what you felt at the end of Eulogy.